some introductions. We will start with Ben Wershner here. He's the Group Regulatory Policy Director at Vodafone Group and Chairman of the GSMA Policy Group in Europe. We have Dr. Marnix Dekker, Deputy Head of Resilience of the Critical Sectors Unit in ENISA. We have Jean-Marie Mel, who's the Group CISO at Orange. And then we have Eric Thorshag, who's the Vice President of Public Affairs at Telenor Group. And then we have Carsten Brinkmann, who's the Chief Information Security Officer at TDC Net and Chairman of the Teleindustrien Cybersecurity Group. So if we could start maybe with some thoughts on the talk that we've just heard, the keynote, and maybe if you've also got some comments then on the current landscape and how that looks for you. Marnix, or Ben, I might start with you actually.
Okay, thank you, and thank you GSMA, thank you Teleindustrien for this event. Fantastic that we're all here. Just some reflections. This is a sort of security and resilience panel. The previous panel was towards a single market panel. The two are inextricably linked. I don't think you can separate one from the other. And we very much see a sort of a triangle at the moment is how we're thinking about it, where you have economy and security at the top of the triangle, and the base of it is technology. And we have to have all of those three things moving in harmony together. And if the technology isn't right, then you get neither economy or economic growth, neither do you get security. And so you talked about what is the threat landscape that we're seeing at the moment. It's varied and it's complex. I've put in those terms. So we're seeing threats on the ground, on our physical networks, terrestrial networks. We see threats under the sea. We've had a series of cable cuts around Europe. Going forward, we can expect something in the sky. The space race is well and truly on, and at Vodafone, we are trying to be part of that space race and contributing to a European sovereign approach to space technology. But that race is going very, very fast, and that's critical that we have a single market approach to that particular topic. And then I think also touched on in the previous panel, where we have attempts to infiltrate our networks, there isn't a single mode. It's not done by a type of person. It's whether it can be state-backed, it can be hacktivists. We can have attacks which are denial of service from full network shutdown. We can have attacks which are extraction of data. And actually what I think was a very important part of the previous panel, we also have sort of malicious insertion of things onto our networks, and the whole issue around child safety online is an absolutely critical one, which as an industry we really need to grapple with. So with this very multi-faceted threat landscape, it is clear to us that we really need all of our resources going collaboratively to resolving. And I just want to finalize my opening statement with there's one data point which was referred to in the previous panel. It's the 200 million euro investment gap. I can't remember which of the CEOs referenced it, but whoever did, thank you very much. I think it's really important to say that analysis of what investment is required in Europe is based on a 5G single network with a signal everywhere across Europe. This is not the digital decade target that Europe now needs. We need more than one network for sure, but we need the level of capability and a level of capacity which goes way, way beyond what is envisaged by a single network producing a 5G signal across the entire European landmass. So when we talk about topics, as was done in the previous panel about consolidation, but more broadly about sectoral reform and how that sectoral reform needs to link into the security and resilience of our networks, we need to have a very forward-looking approach and a new approach for the new realities, which is not, do we have a 5G network everywhere in Europe? Do we have a performant network? Do we have a secure network? Do we have a resilient network, which gives European citizens and businesses what they need?
I'm going to skip over because I can see you've got something to say on this and we will come back to it. Jean-Marie, is it similar for you as an operator? What sort of threats are you seeing?
Well, I think it has been said. I joined Orange in 2007, and it was still the good old days where the only threats were fraud and espionage, spying, corporate spying, state spying. And since, I would say, since the start of war in Crimea in 2014, and we've slowly changed the risk landscape, and Now we face pure destruction of national infrastructure. And we've seen with the start of the war in Ukraine, with Viasat and the threat, and when the Russian directly targeted two sectors, energy and telecom. And that's what they did target in 2007 in Estonia, so in Tallinn. So that's where we stand now. So we used to have the good old, I would say, APTs, the states and nation, the fraud of stuff. Now we have APT groups and ransomware and a lot of things. So the really things that worries me is destruction of the infrastructure. And so I say that's
The
the
physical infrastructure.
major change we have seen so far.
Yeah. Eric, how about for yourself?
Well, before joining Telenor Group, I used to be in the Norwegian government in the Ministry of Justice and Public Security, and then later in the Ministry of Defense as the deputy minister. And what I see is that we are not at peace anymore in Europe. And I think that for the private sector, they don't have the deep insight into what the policymakers really know about what is the situation. But I think this is what we need to take into consideration at the moment, that we are not at peace. We are in what the Russian doctrine calls information confrontation. And that means that also now the Norwegian security authorities has been speaking publicly about that everyone needs to be prepared for sabotage. And the wording actually has changed quite a lot in only the last 2 years. In 2023, the National Security Authority in Norway said that it was probable that there could be acts of sabotage. Now in 2025, they say it's likely. We need to be prepared for it. That is a big shift. And I think the discussion that we just heard, I think this seriousness we need to take into consideration. And I think a fragmented telecom sector is not a very effective response. So I think we need to gather the forces of the operators, and we need to think seriously about how you could build then more resilience and pool investments.
Absolutely. Carsten, how about yourself?
Yeah, but I can only concur to what has been said here, right? We see a new world where we see more hybrid. We see physical disruption of equipment, and then we still have cyber. So let's just make a concrete example on cyber. I think last month we had around 7.8 million emails that was sent to our company. Around 4.8 million emails ended up in our employees' mailbox. That meant we were around 2.2 million emails. That was malware. It was all kind of, pardon my language, crap. We had around 16,000 mail attachment that were ransomware, destruction code, etc. That's what we are up against. So the people on the other side of the fence, so to speak, and I can say that after been working 17 years in the police, they want to do us harm. They want to earn money. They want to do espionage, and they work together. So it's that simple. It's a big business out there to try to hit companies like us. And they cooperate both state-sponsored and you can say private hackers. That's the world we're up against. So if we keep believing we can solve everything as individual companies, individual sectors, then we will lose the fight. It's that simple, if you ask me. So it's not a question about if we should cooperate more. It's a question about how, and not about when, because when is now. So that's basically how I see the world. It's quite simple.
So as we become more connected, the technology's moved on. the threat landscape has widened because of that connectivity and because more people are using that technology. Marnix, what's your perspective? Because you would see a lot across all the European states.
So at ENISA, we work closely with the national authorities, telecom authorities, and with the Commission to implement, at the moment, the NIS2 a lot. I really agree with what has been said so far. I mean, the NIS2 covers many critical sectors. There are many critical sectors. Telecom sector is very special. It's very, very special. I mean, what Ben just said, I mean, it's true. It really ranges from subsea cables to nation-state attacks like Salt Typhoon that happened over Christmas. You know, Chinese attackers deep into American networks. These are not easy companies to get into. So, I mean, if these companies cannot keep their network secure, I mean, you can imagine what we're facing up against. I mean, on the plus side, of course, also I have to say, and that I can, you know, telecom sector is very mature. I mean, it has been on the legislation for a long while. I understand why people say, you know, it's time to take a different approach a bit. Because telecom sector has shown to be very mature, and I think it's been also a bit of an example. The 5G toolbox, I think, is an interesting European project where we try to limit the use of third country supplier Chinese companies to reduce the dependency outside of Europe, to make sure there's a strong market of European network equipment and European suppliers. And there, I think, you can see the telecom sector playing an example role, and I think that is also the way we should see things going forward. That the telecom sector is, we can learn a lot from the telecom sector, and I completely agree what was said earlier about, in general, private sector not being completely aware of the threats we're facing. And I think more dialogue is definitely needed, and sometimes we're now working on a concept called stress tests, where you basically on paper walk through some scenarios in increasing severity and ask companies, okay, what would you do in this case? And if this happened, what would you do in that case? And what we notice is that many companies in many sectors, especially outside the telecom sector, they're not even thinking about those things. I mean, sabotage teams, you know, physically breaking, cutting cables, they're not even thinking at that stage. And I think that there we need a bit more dialogue and clear understanding of where are the responsibilities. I think there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit. Also around the telecom energy sector dependencies. I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of putting the two business continuity plans together and see if they fit. I mean, is the energy company going to restore power sooner to certain areas because there is an important network antenna there so that we can cover a bigger area, so we can actually help the teams in the energy company to be connected and restore power sooner? I mean, that's not a money issue. That's just a matter of aligning business continuity plans and say, hey, if you're going to, you know, if we have an issue there, make sure there's diesel there, and then we can fix it over there. And I think the telecom sector and the energy sector need to start collaborating more closely. We will do our best as well, but yeah.
We'll hold tight on that thought because I will get back to the energy sector. I did want to talk first a bit about how companies and national authorities can strengthen their collaboration. Erik, you've spoken about an example to me called Bukkesprang. Have I pronounced that right?
Yes, it's in Norwegian, Bukkesprang. So it's buck jump. It's actually the name of a live fire cybersecurity exercise that Telenor has been doing in Norway together with the Norwegian Armed Forces Cyber Regiment and the Norwegian National Security Authority, where we actually train across sectors with cyber security experts from all different sectors in society, the critical sectors, the banking, the energy sector, the police authorities, the military authorities, all the players that you actually would like to gather around the table if you actually are facing the big security, your worst nightmare, really. Yeah. And if you actually are going to get better at something, you need to train and rehearse, because you very seldom in any aspect of life rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your training. So actually I think it's crucial that we need to prepare in advance, and we've been doing this training together with government authorities since 2017. And it's quite effective because it builds this team of cybersecurity experts that collaborate together across the sectors. And I think that is one good example of how you can strengthen resilience by actually preparing in advance so that you don't need to reach out and try to establish connections when you're in the midst of a crisis. So that's actually an example from Norway I would bring forward.
That's great. We are trying to be a lot more proactive in cybersecurity. I know it's something that's a bit of a juggle because there are so many fires to fight. Jean-Marie, how have you seen that change in your time at Orange in terms of being quite reactive, but now trying to be more proactive?
Great question. So obviously, like any companies, it goes through crisis. You go through, to be honest. You know, you can do as many crisis management, you can do as many awareness training you want, but you only improve when you have some crisis. It can be a small crisis, like a small ransomware or somewhere, or maybe some fraud at a high level, millions of euros or some things, or some corporate spying. And that's where you really take into conscious the hardship of securing digital infrastructure, and that's where you tend to put into efforts and training. However, the thing is that the telecom sector is very specific because it has a lot of things, a lot of I would say sectors like cloud, infrastructures, energy, network, obviously. And on top of that, you have the telecom network. And we still support, 40 years later, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. And there is a saying, you know, it's not me, it's Bruce Schneier, a very famous security researcher, is you can't secure what you don't understand. And we live in a world when the technology has become so complex that you have to have a lot of competencies on that. And I'm pretty sure that Europe is the first provider of competencies to the GAFAM sector. So that's one of the issue we have when having to put up competencies at the right level on the cybersecurity threats, because you have to have security expert on cloud, on telco, on systems, on network, on transmission, and so on, and then now on energy, you know, and
All
then
right,
you have
we've
BCCM.
stopped talking about it now, so it's all very keen.
So yeah, so that's where we stand. Before, you know, when we did audit all the networks when we launched, and when we did audit the 4G network, we were, because I was part of it, 3 auditors for the 4G networks in France, and now for the 5G it's 25 auditors specialized in telco, because there are so many items that you have to look for. So and the issue we have is that telecom operators have finite resources, and nations have as many time and as many resources they want. You know, they have to be lucky once. Yeah, we have to be perfect every time, which will not happen. You know, because nobody is perfect.
And that's where you get to practice your small crisis. Carsten, let's talk now about the energy sector. Would you like to share an example from, I guess, good collaboration between telco and maybe the national grid?
Yeah, I think in general, at least in Denmark, we are getting pretty good in the individual sectors to work together. We do in the telco sector here in Denmark, we are doing crisis management exercises yearly on cross of the telco sector. We are doing threat intel sharing and so on and so forth. But when we start looking across the different sectors, we are not good, to be honest. And I think we really need to map out the dependencies we have between the different sectors. It was mentioned here just a few minutes ago, but you know, if the power goes out, does the energy sector know where it's most important that they get power in first. Is there some special areas in the telco sector or the finance sector and so on where it's more important? The same for the telco sector, where it's most important for the energy sector to get the data line up and running if we have downtime in our environments. And that is not, we're not good at that, at least in Denmark right now. And that really needs to change, because that is where we see the big difference. Actually, I believe we at times actually are more, I won't say competing against each other, but we have some examples on an island here in Denmark where the power was cut. Should it then be all the telcos that need to build up more and more battery capacity, or should the emergency power from the energy sector be started up after 4 hours instead of 6 hours? Who makes these decisions? Because it's not only a question about, or the question is to keep Denmark safe or Europe safe, right? That's what it's all about if something bad happens. But the question is, how do we make the best investments, both in time and money? Is it to buy battery capacity in X amount of telcos, or is it for the energy sector to start up the emergency power 2 hours earlier, for example? And in Denmark, there is actually nowhere to have these discussions right now. At least I'm not aware of them. I haven't been at a meeting debating these areas in the 4 years I have been in the telco sector. We have then gotten a new ministry in Denmark, and that's really good, because that's the whole purpose, at least seen from my perspective. That is to have a ministry sitting at the end of the table, hopefully with all the critical sectors around the table, and say, now we need to fix this. We have a grown up at the end of the table. Now let's fix it. That's what needs to happen as soon as possible, if you ask me.
How does that work with Vodafone in the UK? What engagement have you had?
So, well, I'll give a UK example. Let me try to break this down into, say, I think 3 layers. So, in terms of what has come clear from this discussion is the sheer interdependency between telco and energy. The two have to go hand in hand going forward. So, I just want to call a few good examples. So, firstly, we have an ever-expanding number of stakeholders that we deal with, including NATO now. And so we are working with NATO, I'm sure others are in the room as well, on an initiative around subsea infrastructure, where they're looking at how to have better risk sharing and preventative measures, not on telco by itself, but telco plus energy together, bringing all the actors into the room together and having a common platform for sharing information, so that all the people that need to be informed in the right time on the threat landscape are informed appropriately. And that's a very important initiative where you see, from a threat perspective, telco and energy coming together with very important stakeholders who need to manage this process. Then when we look at the next layer, I think the interdependency is, we know that the telco sector cannot survive without the energy grid. It is obvious. We had the experience in at the start of the energy crisis, where we were looking at the rules associated with what happens if the energy system goes down. Leave to one side just the price effect of an energy cost. But what happens if the energy grid goes down, and when it comes back up again, do we have prioritized supply or not? Completely different rules across all of the EU. So whether we were critical infrastructure or not depended by member state. And then secondly, even if we were critical infrastructure, were we on the list of critical industries that got prioritized supply? It just varied from where we were. So really important that the understanding of how our sector depends on energy and how we are critical for the functioning of society at a time of crisis needs to be reflected in harmonized decision making at the European level. And then where we're trying to use our technology to support the energy sector is the UK example, where we're looking at using 5G standalone at the distributed edges of the network, the energy grid, where there is renewable energy being generated. to make the matching of supply and demand more stable. So one of the challenges we have in renewable grids is you can never be fully sure when the renewable energy supply is at its peak, and you can never be sure when demand is at its peak. You know, place like Denmark or a place like the UK, we can be pretty sure when it's going to rain or when it's going to be windy. Not as reliable when it's going to be sunny, right? So the level of generation is quite variable, and you have peak traffic events on the energy grid. And by having smart technology in the energy grid, you can better match supply and demand. And we believe that's a really important initiative that we're working on with National Grid. And then the other element of this is the battery supply. We know that our networks would benefit enormously from having far greater resilience through battery backup. The cost is prohibitive. So we can go some of the way to having battery backup, but we know rolling this out across the whole of the EU will not be possible at the current level of profitability of the industry. And again, it plays to what I said earlier about the target is not about having a single 5G network today. It's that level of resilience, which also includes battery backup, is really critical. So at every level you look at this, there needs to be greater sort of collaboration between telco and energy with the relevant stakeholders in the room. And there is a symbiotic relationship, it's absolutely clear, but we need to sort of unblock a few blockers to get us along the way.
We're still talking a lot of problems, aren't we?
No, but I mean, it's also a solution, I have to say. I mean, if you go back to the previous panel, we were discussing a lot about telecom sector suffering under a lot of rules and a lot of investment. And here we're not speaking about asking more from the sector. We're actually speaking about, you know, what can other sectors do to help the telecom sector. So I think it's one of the solutions, actually. I mean, I think this is the right perspective, to be honest.
I mean, the collaboration definitely is. It's, you know, ensuring that we get everyone to the table. I think even within the GSMA, when we've got the GSMA Telecommunications ISAC, that's, you know, sharing amongst operators on what's going on within the industry. Now, we also engage with the aviation ISAC because what we do impacts them. We try and engage with the, electricity ISAC and vice versa. That's lots of different industries that are very dependent on us. And so, yeah, there's lots of different levels of collaboration. And it's whether at that level we're really getting everyone to the table to solve these problems. Maybe not until there's a crisis, isn't it? It's much easier to bring people together. All right, so next I'd like to talk about cross-border resiliency. We had, what was it? Lars mentioned the security clearance thing that's going on in the Nordics. Does anyone else have any other examples on how we can improve this cross-border resiliency?
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, we had a live example on our network. So, common knowledge, Vodafone Portugal was subject to a very significant cyber attack. The network went down, and the reason why we were able to recover the network in very quick time was because the entire backup system was located outside of Portugal. It's a classic example of having cross-border resilience to enable very rapid response to a very significant cyber attack. And we believe that is the sort of the magic source of Europe as a whole, right? We're having a single market, but also where you can have this cross-border resilience brings the best of both worlds, deep in-market capabilities on security and resilience, and then augmented with cross-border backup and resilience is a very effective way of ensuring that our networks are more secure than otherwise they would be. So that, for us, that's the prime example of why cross-border resilience makes so much sense. Where that's threatened is where you have very restrictive data localization rules, which would prevent that from happening. Then you cannot operate a cross-border resilience system. We have networks, operation centers in a number of our European member states. They need to be able to collaborate, and they do. But any increased level of localization, which we have seen creeping in the last few years, will threaten that cross-border resilience.
Great. What do we think that governments can do to assist critical service providers to reduce the attack surface?
I wanted to briefly, I mean, on the attack surface, okay, it goes back to the suppliers, but on the cross-border resilience, I think there's also the issue of sharing. I mean, I want to go back to the point raised on incident reporting. still not being done enough. I think early warning is important. I mean, at the moment, the Russians are, they attack Norway, and then they attack Italy, and then maybe they cut a few cables in France, and we're all, each one of us is starting from scratch. We're not using each other's knowledge, and I know, we know why. Cybersecurity is a very sensitive area. Cybersecurity incidents are often very tricky to share. It's much easier to share about a big storm coming or about physical events. You see much more early warning collaboration, even between telecoms and energy. But I think we really need to break now this barrier. I mean, it's strange, but I mean, even military movements of troops, we can see it on Twitter. I read everything about the Sol Typhoon attack. I read it online, but then when you ask a member state, okay, what was the impact? Can you share? No, we cannot share. And this has to be broken somehow, because otherwise we are trying 27 times to find again, the same threat actor again, and that even goes across sectors. Yeah. So, I mean,
I'm sorry, Sam. I heard that you didn't want to have the problems, but there actually is one problem with the security clearance regime, and that is actually that stricter security regulations, that's good in itself.
Yeah.
But the challenge we have seen in the Nordic countries is that the security legislation is stricter, it's similar, but it's not the same. And therein lies the problem, because it's a Lego system trying to cooperate with a Duplo system, to put it in a very kind of figurative manner of speech. And that is the challenge, because then you're not able to collaborate across, and then you're not able to share low-level graded information across borders, because there are, for many good reasons, strict rules around that. But I think actually we would benefit more from finding a way of sharing more. On the military side, there is actually systems for this, especially within the NATO context or international operations. But on the civilian side, this lacks. So I think actually the resilience would benefit a lot from actually being able to tap into each other's knowledge. So the biggest hindrance actually to cross-border resilience and actually tapping into Nordic talent for Telenor or European talent for European operators is that these systems, it's a hindrance to building more resilience, and it doesn't make sense, because it is actually in everyone's benefit to find the ability to create these systems for information sharing, so that you actually can collaborate on creating cross-border resilience, having your data backed up in another country, and also tapping into talent that is probably not in your state, it's outside of your country. And that I think is crucial to find ways. And here I think the telecom industry, collaborating with the NISA and other bodies to facilitate this change is critical in the geopolitical landscape we are operating in.
Let's take that point. Oh yeah.
No, yeah, I would just say just some good examples maybe from some other sectors, because I also worked in the finance sector, and a good example of cross-border cooperation is the NF CERT. That is Nordic, and that means that the CERT is also operational and can support the individual banks if they get hit by something bad, right? And that gives the possibility for the CERT to actually get information not only from within the country, but on cross of different Nordic countries. And I think we have at least in the TI been talking about should we build something up? Would it make sense to build something similar for the telco sector? And if you then even combined it with public-private cooperation, so some of the threat intel you might have a hard time sometimes to share to X amount of companies could then be more anonymized within this Nordic European, for example, CERT in this way. I believe there is really good possibilities, that it's just a question about tried off what can work and what cannot work. We have also seen it, as I said before, I've also been working many years in the police. We have Europol, we have Interpol, we have EC3 that is working with cyber. It's all the same you want to do, right? You need to work cross-border. So I think it's the possibilities is there. We just need to get it up on the right level so we can start running it, because then you also take the competition out of it. I always believe security should not be a competition, right? But still, it's different companies. So if you can move it up in setups like NF-Cert and stuff like that, then we start moving stuff, and then, for God's sake, make it operational. Not just, it's great that we do knowledge sharing and stuff like that. That's great. We have a lot of forums where we can do that, but it needs to be operational. So the knowledge that something has happened in Italy can be used when we see something similar in Norway.
Jean-Marie, where do you...
Yeah, sharing information is of paramount importance, and there are a lot of entities that do share a lot of information. GSMA, for example, on threats, on risk attacks, and so on. Telecom operators through their computer emergency response team. But there is one sector I don't see sharing any information, are the national security agencies. If you give them any information, you will never hear from them anymore. And that's an issue we have, because they have a lot of information, very important information, and they usually wait to be sure that this information can be shared. But once it is shared, it is on no value anymore. So that's the difficulty we have when we face attacks like Salt Typhoon, and we had a concern. Is there any 0 days? Is there any something we should do, And the answer was no. And so maybe there ENISA has a role to maybe, I'm not going to say to force, but to persuade national agencies to share more about security incidents and so on, so we can have the right information, specifically IOCs. So in this of compromise, which are very, very important, and so on. So, and the issue we have, because we are speaking about the NIS2, and the NIS2 is a very nice framework, but we should never forget that we have two frameworks. There is the service NIS2, which is cloud, managed services, and so on, which is ruled by the implementing act. And then there is the sector NIS2, which is the telecom for us, which is a local transposition. And in France, we have a word that is régalien, which comes from regus. It's the king, and the king does not share, which means that the telecom is still seen by the nations as something that is deeply rooted to the sovereignty of the nation. And so that's where it's very hard to have them to share information, or just to have them, I would say, allow us to have cross-border resiliency, because for the culture of the country, the history, yes, plays a heavy role in what they will allow or not. And for France, it's very deeply anchored within the culture of the French agency. They are very good at what they do, but they tend to refuse to implement anything that is not French. So that's why the NIS2 transposition in France is a nightmare, to be honest. It goes beyond what is NIS2, and to be honest, the director from the security agency already said that the telecom and other critical sector will have to obey to all European laws, but on the French transposition. And they say, yes, there is a European implementing act, but in the law it is said that if the French transposition is better, then it is the French transposition that will apply even to the cloud sector. So that's why it's very hard for us to have trans-border, because, you know, regulation contaminates everything it touches. So you don't want to bring the French transposition to the Spanish, or I would say any other European country, because that's how nation works when they deal with. So trans-border resilience is very difficult, but we should start at sharing information.
Say that attitude changed in your ideal world. What would that help you do? So say the attitude of not wanting to share changed.
Yeah.
And they were happy for you to share cross-border. How would that help you?
Well, like I said, to have a better and faster response to attacks, and to have deeply understanding of what happened. I can take an example about South Korea Telecom. We know that they lost a lot of information about the SIM, so they are swapping all the SIMs, but we don't know what is at the root of the incident. Is it a backup that was stored somewhere it should not have been? What is a deep compromise of the telecom network? What is was it insider attacks? We don't know. So if we don't know, we can't take any action to remediate to the threat. And so the threat, if I am taking the South Korea Telecom incident, totally remain open, because we don't know. And the worst we can do is, because we don't know, we will take some action a bit everywhere. And so we will, I would say, put a bit of money everywhere, but we will not focus where we should be focusing. So that's where we will be benefiting from sharing of such information.
We all have a lot to say. I think we should maybe, what I think it would be good would just to get your thoughts, just to wrap things up in terms of, we've got a little bit of time, but just to wrap things up and get your views on what you would like to see going forward, maybe what, on the regulatory and the threat landscape.
If you look at me, I'll start.
Yes, yeah.
So, look, I think a lot of ideas and also some solutions discussed already in this panel. So maybe try to not go into a specific answer on the security and resilience, but bring it up a level. And I link back really to what Vivek said right at the start of this very important event. We've been standing still in Europe. And the reality is, in the technology space, when you stand still, it means you fall miles and miles behind very, very quickly. And we've got to a situation where Europe has become, sometimes through its own choices, a taker of technology and not a maker of technology, a taker of innovation and not a maker of innovation. You know, we're in a world where trade deficits have been in a very sharp focus in recent weeks and months. You know, let's ask ourselves, what is the European digital trade position? I don't know what the number is. I don't know what it is in euros, but it is going to be hugely, hugely negative. That we've been looking at partnering with the University of Bonn. They have something called the Digital Dependence Index. Look at the Digital Dependence Index of the University of Bonn. It is scary. There are 2 countries in the world which are not, bright red. That's the US, which is green, and China, which is orange. And China, on its patents, is moving miles ahead. So that's going to change. There's only one other country which hasn't fallen further behind between 2019 and 2023. That's South Korea. Everywhere else is going backwards. So the question around how do we deal with all these really significant threats? Yes, there will be problems. There's complexity. There's risk sharing. There's information sharing. But fundamentally, if we're in a position where we're not making our own technology, we're always going to be on the back foot. And that's why what Renata's been talking about is simplification, omnibus, new DNA, a fundamentally different approach to how to the policy for our sector. It's not just about where we need to be today. There has to be a vision of where we're going to be in 5 years' time, secure, resilient, absolutely, but leading the world again, which we have to aspire to, because otherwise we're always going to be on the back foot for security and resilience.
That's really helpful. Marnik?
Yeah, briefly, of course, the calls for a single cybersecurity framework for Europe, I think, completely, and initially we're quite in favor, of course. I want to hook up to the point on the EU suppliers and what you mentioned about this attack surface. In the 90s, I think, we used to consume a lot of Microsoft products and Oracle products that were really broken in terms of security, and we were spending government money and business money and to kind of run after all the vulnerabilities and the gaps and the holes of companies that were making a lot of money, actually. And there was always this big disclaimer, you know, if something goes wrong, if you use this software, please don't blame us. And I think you're completely right. We cannot go back to a situation where we're just consumers of, I don't know, broken Chinese technology, and then we're spending taxpayer money to run after those bugs. I mean, that makes no sense. We have to somehow get back control, and that's, I think, how we can have a chance to make the attack surface stronger. I mean, European suppliers, this is also in the Draghi report, we have to make it easier for European suppliers to grow, to sell in Europe, and to help them with, you know, to make Europe a secure place to do business, so that, you know, you operate out of Europe, you get protection from the national CSIRT, you get your threat intelligence, and the message to business, or at least to the suppliers, should be, you know, if you come here to do business, we got you covered. You know, on cybersecurity, we will have your back, and it should not be this doom message, like, you know, if you're in Europe, you know, here's a ton of security rules that you have to follow. That is not going to create a big market of suppliers in Europe, I think.
Yeah, it is important to focus on that technology and collaboration. Jean-Marie, how about for yourself?
Well, maybe we should also focus on the supply chain, because telecom operators in Europe, we are very small. And if you already try to have an American company sign your security clauses, I share your pain, you know, Oracle, 7 years. 7 years to have basic security clauses in the contracts. So I believe that's somewhere, and I believe the Cyber Resilience Act should help us. I'm not sure yet, because it's still to have to be put in place. But that's, I think that's where Europe could help us on that, because I think we should stop being naive about the fact that companies outside of Europe will not play fair when it comes to the supply chain obligations. And we've seen the large amount of lobbying against the Cyber Resilience Act from American companies, and they managed to remove a substantial parts of that. Like, I'm specifically thinking about the industrial automats that were part removed from the critical annexes. So yeah, I think that we should benefit from more with help from the European Union on the supply chain.
Technology focus, not product focus.
Yeah.
I think we need a common approach. That is my most important takeaway. And then I think we all need to think about what we can do more to not only prevent and withstand attacks, but also recover if we're taken.
Yeah, great. And Carsten?
Yeah, let me make it short. I think cross-sector, cross-country cooperation, better public and private cooperation. And I would just like to end with a good example, because I would like to get more information out of the intelligence service. But I also have seen good examples within the last 6 months where we actually have made a difference based on intel we are getting out of the intelligence service. So it's not all bad. More of it, please, but they are willing to share, at least in Denmark, also information that makes a difference operational.
Yeah, the threat report from the Danish Secret Service was excellent. It came out a few months ago. Yeah.
Perfect. And on that note, I'd really like to thank you all for joining me on this panel. Please join me in welcoming, thanking the panelists.